Welcome to the 7th Annual Life in Kyrgyzstan Conference, organized by DCA, IHEID, and ISDC. And our session is on gender and intra-household relations. My name is Akylai Muktarbek, and I will be moderating this session today. So gender shapes the opportunities and constraints that men and women face in securing a safe environment, feasible livelihoods, and strong communities across political, economic, and cultural settings. And gender issues and inter-household relations, they have become increasingly popular among regional researchers because understanding these issues might contribute a lot to more sustainable livelihoods and to improved well-being of local communities. So we have three presentations on gender and inter-household relations today. We have Nurgul, Tilenbaeva, Ilias, Suvanov, and Jonbegim, Mukhtor, who will be presenting their research projects. And before we start, just a small reminder, we have 2 language channels in Zoom, and this session will be recorded. And each presenter will have about 30 minutes. 20 minutes to present, and about 10 minutes for questions and answers. Well, we don't have any participants yet. I don't know, well, maybe if anyone, if presenters also, speakers have like questions to each other, you can ask those questions in chat, or you can just raise your hands and ask them directly to speaker because we don't have too many people in our session for now. Okay, so I guess just because we have very limited time, we should start. So Nurgul, please go ahead when you're ready.
Good afternoon, everyone. It's my pleasure today to be presenting one of my works. So let me start sharing my screen. Okay, and can you see it well? All right. Mm-hmm. So the topic of my presentation of my research is as you see, sorry, I'm just making some changes. Okay, so it's from one's cradle to another's grave, death and children's nutritional status. So it's work in progress. That's why I would really appreciate your feedback and some helpful comments that I might receive on my topic. Okay, so why study this topic? We know that death of a family member has large psychological and economic costs, especially for children of young age, because they are very vulnerable. And in the literature, when they talk about economic costs, they usually mention loss of income and productive labor from the deceased. However, in countries like Kyrgyzstan, households, in addition to those economic costs, they also face large funeral expenses. So just as an example, looking at the data from Life in Kyrgyzstan, the average number of visitors at a funeral of Remembrance Day attended by a household was 227, and funeral expenses reached as high as 11 months worth of the average income of a family. So these are clearly very massive amounts of spending on burial procedures, and potentially they could pose a serious threat to households' welfare. And in fact, the Kyrgyz parliament made numerous attempts to pass a law, so far unsuccessfully, to put restrictions on celebrations, funerals, etc., similar to the one that is already in place in Tajikistan. At the same time, this problem of excessive spending on funerals is not unique only to Kyrgyz society. It's really interesting that, here is a quote, that South African households spend the equivalent of 1 year's income to bury deceased household members. All right, and at the same time, The Economist, the magazine, reported on splendid funerals in Ghana, where the typical burial costs between $2,000 and $3,500, despite the fact that 79% of the population is living on less than $2 per day. Okay. Now, so the purpose of the present work is to study the effect of death of a family member on child nutritional outcomes using Life in Kyrgyzstan survey over 5 years. What is the contribution is that, first of all, the literature on bereavement effects is quite scarce. especially when we talk about nutritional outcomes, because this literature is mostly focusing on educational outcomes. At the same time, within a particular time frame, death of prime age adults is a rare event, which makes it much harder to study it. From the point of view of the methodology and contribution of this work is employing child fixed effects. Because in a lot of works, it's not possible to track children over time. So that's why it's not possible to use the child fixed effects. And we will speak about why it's important later. Now, I also attempt to differentiate between types of death when I look at the bereavement effects. So I differentiate between death of a major breadwinner or other household member and between expected and unexpected deaths. And in addition to that, the analysis moves beyond the mean level analysis. So I would like to also test the hypothesis that maybe children who are malnourished in the first place, so at the bottom of the health distribution, they suffer the most from bereavement. And in order to check that, I use quantile regressions with child fixed effects. Now, when we talk about the channels of bereavement effects, as I said, we can differentiate psychological and economic costs. I think it's quite clear for the psychological costs, and for the economic costs, I've also mentioned about them. And these are basically the main sources of financial hardship for the families left behind. And because of this high economic costs of death, we have an income and substitution effect, meaning that on one side, we have a decrease in resources, which could lead to a decrease in health investments in children. But at the same time, the share spent on the health investments could go down. So the implications of this are, because of the cut in the key inputs, we could have malnourishment and diseases. And it's very interesting that these are not the only implications. We could have indirect consequences as well. So for example, if we talk about adults like caregivers, mothers of these children, because of grieving and because of this huge stress, they may start having an unhealthy behavior, including drinking and smoking, which of course would affect children of young age. And another interesting channel could be that if the remaining family members do not expect anything, any returns from these children in the future, so if the main motivation to raise children is old age security, then again, investments in these children could be cut if these are not their own children. And other long-term costs could be a high risk of teenage pregnancy, early marriage, dropping out of school, delinquency, and adult depression. Now, when we talk about theory, we can discuss bereavement in the context of intergenerational altruism, so the models by Becker and Toms. Basically, what they say is that parents invest in the children's human capital, motivated by its effects on their future productivity. And the main assumption is the assumption of perfect capital markets in their models. So it means there are no liquidity constraints. Parents can freely borrow against children's future earnings. And the main conclusion of the model is that the optimal investment would be one where a marginal return to human capital would equal to the marginal cost. So in terms of our study, loss of a family member has no effect on investment decisions with respect to children. However, the big question that we should ask ourselves, but does the assumption of perfect capital markets hold in the context of Kyrgyzstan and maybe other developing countries? So when we have imperfect capital markets, when parents cannot freely borrow against their children's future incomes, the bereavement effect depends on the wealth level of the family. So if the family is wealthy enough, it has enough precautionary savings or assets, then they can still weather the costs, weather the shock of bereavement, and they leave their investment decisions unchanged, so no effect on health investment. However, families at the bottom of the wealth distribution, they are no longer able to withstand the shock. So we have a fall in health investments in children. But what about insurance markets? So even if we don't have perfect capital markets, and even if families may not have enough precautionary savings, there could still be some formal or informal life insurance in place when liquidity constraints would no longer be binding. And an interesting example for the informal life insurance is, for example, this practice of extending monetary gifts general in Kyrgyzstan, but also in other countries, for example, Indonesia, China, etc. These monetary gifts to the family of the deceased serve in some sense as insurance premiums. So they help to weather the costs of bereavement, so there is no effect on health investment of children. So far, when we talked about the models of intergenerational altruism, one other assumption that they had was that health production function does not contain time of the caregiver as an argument. However, if we believe that parental time is an argument of the function, then actually investments in the health may fall, even if there are perfect capital markets, even if the families have enough precautionary savings, or even if there are perfect insurance markets. So it all depends on these three components. Now, the main methodological challenge that people face in empirical research is whether death is exogenous or endogenous. And when we actually talk about it and think about it more deeply, it's ultimately a philosophical question, right? And as one famous development economist, Jean-Louis Arcand, likes to say, it is eventually a question of faith, like if you believe that death is exogenous or endogenous. And generally, death is considered exogenous, but there are some researchers who insist that it is actually endogenous. And one of the sources that they talk about is selection bias. So basically, they argue that households that experience death of a family member may be disadvantaged even before death occurs. Or for example, we have children placed in orphanages or in the streets, and they are excluded from the household surveys, but these are the ones who suffer the most from bereavement, right? And we may also have households headed by children because of the loss of the adults. And we know that in the household survey, it's the adult who answers the questions, and again, they are excluded from the sample. So the implication of this is the negative bias in the estimated bereavement effects. And I mean, there are several solutions that could be implemented, but in the literature, they usually use propensity score matching techniques. Another possible source of endogeneity that researchers talk about it is omitted variables. So of course, health is a function of many, many different factors, and it's not possible to include all of them in the regression analysis. And specifically, if we talk about measures of socioeconomic status, they could be correlated with the incidence of death in addition to affecting children's outcomes. The result, again, is the negative bias in the estimated bereavement effects. And potential solutions that you find in the literature is IV and fixed effects models. Now, we also have to talk about cause of death as another methodological challenge, because it really matters. Is it a death due to a long-term illness or, for example, due to accident? Because they could have completely different implications. So if we talk about long-term illness, then maybe actually the costs are incurred before the family member dies, like especially the medical costs, right? So that's why we have a negative bias. However, if we talk about sudden death, for example, due to accident, we could have larger bereavement effects. Now talking about data, so I used life in Kyrgyzstan data over 5 years. Here, the main things to say is that we see that the mean weight for age z-score, height for age z-score, and arm circumference for age z-score, these are negative. That's interesting to note, but they are still in the healthy range. And it's the most negative for height for age z-score, which means that young children in Kyrgyzstan, they are at risk of chronic malnutrition. Okay, let me go to the next slide. Now, if we talk about household characteristics of the children, I mean, children who belong to the households, because death is a rare event, of course, only 3.3% of the children experience it, and 1.6% experience unexpected death of a family member. What is another interesting observation is that children live in families who consume on average this much per year, which translates to $3.98 daily per family member, which means that the representative child in our sample is poor according to the national poverty line. So it means that bereavement may exacerbate the already kind of poor state of the children in Kyrgyzstan. And in this table, I compare the children from the bereaved sample and from the control sample to see if there are statistically significant differences. And what is interesting is that all of the measures of nutritional status, they're smaller for bereaved children, which we will expect, but at the same time, the difference is not statistically significant. Another very interesting observation that actually, when we look at total yearly consumption of the household, it is higher for the bereaved children than for the controlled children, and the difference is statistically significant at 5%, which goes in direct contradiction to those scholars who claim that bereaved children are disadvantaged in the first place. So that's, I thought, an interesting observation. Now talking about the empirical analysis. So I use the fixed effects model. My left-hand side variable is the child outcome, which is about anthropometric outcomes of child I in household age at year T. My main variable of interest is the death variable, which is the dummy variable for the loss of a family member. And then I also have another independent variable of interest, which is a change in consumption of household age at year T. I control for child level characteristics, household level characteristics. I have child specific effects and year specific effects. So in terms of child outcomes, these are WAS, HAS, WHC, and ACAS. So I'm just using these abbreviations. And why do I focus on anthropometric outcomes? Because nutrition or malnutrition has a huge impact on children's physical, emotional, and cognitive development, and they also represent different dimensions of children's health. And another main advantage is that these are objective assessments and not based on recall. Now, if we talk about death, I first look at death of a family member in general, then death of a major breadwinner, other household member, and I try to define what I call unexpected death. It rests on quite strong assumptions, and I'm aware of that. One definition I use is death when an accident was reported by a household as a shock in the same 12 months when a family member was reported dead, or death when no illness of the family member was reported by a household in the previous 12 months at year T-1. Now, why do I also control for the change in consumption? Because I said that death represents both economic and emotional costs. So the idea is when I introduce change in consumption, I control for the economic part of the costs. And if the death coefficient still remains statistically and economically significant, it means that on top of economic costs, there are still emotional costs of death. And I have a standard set of control variables at the level of the child and at the level of the household. Now, I use fixed effects and random effect estimation, but always the Hausmann test is in favor of the fixed effects model, which makes sense. It's very important to control for the child fixed effects. And my estimation, my identification assumptions are that first, death is exogenous, and second, there are no time-varying omitted variables, which are correlated with death and at the same time affect children's nutritional status. And I think I have to go faster now. The last thing is I also look at the quantile regressions with fixed effects. Okay, so here are some results. And just to see, first of all, we see that when we talk about the composite measure of nutritional status, we see that there is a huge decline in WAS in the children who experience death in a family member. If there is a loss of a family member, their weight for age decreases by almost half of a standard deviation. Okay, ceteris paribus. We also see there is almost no effect in the long run, so no changes in HAS, some effect in the short run working through economic channels, and some effect for ACAS. Now, if I talk about unexpected death, I get the results which are very similar to the previous ones. And then when I talk about death of a major breadwinner, it's interesting that qualitatively the results again are very similar, but the magnitudes are much larger now in line with what we expect. So the numbers are much larger in the reduction of class especially. And when I look at the unexpected death of a major breadwinner, that we expect to have the highest decrease in nutritional status, and we get the results consistent with the expectations. Qualitatively, they are similar, but the magnitudes are the largest. Now, when I run quantile regressions, I do not find support for the hypothesis that bereavement effects would be strongest for the lowest quantile. So just to conclude, death of a family member in general has a large negative effect on the overall nutritional status of children less than 60 months of age. It has only short-term negative consequences and no long-term. No consequences, yes, that's what I talked about. We have both economic and psychological costs of death. Nature of death does matter for nutrition. So if it's a major breadwinner, it's more pronounced. And if it's unexpected, it's also more pronounced. And no support for the hypothesis that children at the bottom of the health distribution suffer the most. And the fact that death matters means that because we have imperfect capital markets, liquidity constraints may be binding. And at the same time, informal insurance mechanisms that are in place, they are not adequate to prevent from short-run consequences, but they are good enough to prevent the long-run consequences. And just the last slide for today is that, of course, this paper has limitations, and I am aware of that. So first of all, the method of identifying unexpected deaths is flawed as it rests on a strong set of assumptions. And I mean, I tried to explore more of the exact channels, but these are still very crude estimates. I was not able to really define what do I mean by emotional costs. And in terms of data points, 5 years of data might have been insufficient when I wanted to look at the distributional effect. So that's why probably I got the inconclusive results for the quantile regressions. So that's it for me for today. And if you have any questions, I will be very happy to answer, or if you have any comments or suggestions.
Yeah, thank you, Nurgul. Yes, please, you can ask your questions via chat, or you can even raise your hands and ask questions directly to Nurgul. Nurgul, I want to thank you. And I'm really happy that you have been doing like different projects. Like I remember last time it was about like spendings on celebrations. Now it's about spendings on funerals. The thing that like we've been talking a lot, but like we have still like quite a large knowledge gap. And I'm really happy that like we've been doing like very different research projects regarding these type of expenses. Yeah, so I guess we have no questions for now, so maybe
just one question.
Yeah,
Thank you, Nurgul, for beautiful presentation. Can you just remind how you defined sudden death?
Yeah, sure. So let me go to this slide. Okay, so it's a very kind of crude estimate. So it's either death when an accident was reported by a household as a shock in the same 12 months, when a family member was reported dead, or when no illness of the family member was reported by a household in the previous 12 months. And of course, I understand that this is flawed, strong set of assumptions, but given data limitations, this is the best I could do. Unfortunately, yes.
So as I understood, you want to take unexpected deaths as exogenous variable, and you want to regress that X variable across the WAZ, this health characteristics, yes, WAZ, HAZ, and
yes, for the so my left-hand side variable is this WAZ, HAZ, etc. So the nutritional status outcomes. And then my right-hand side variable of interest, one is death. And so I just use various measures of death, and one of them is unexpected death, which could be unexpected death of a family member, unexpected death of a major breadwinner, or unexpected death of a household member. And here I didn't present just for time considerations for the other household member, but we get quite similar results.
Sorry, can you remind year-specific effects? What was that?
So I just mean that it's a fixed effects model. And in addition to child fixed effects, I also have year fixed effects.
Oh, okay, okay.
Just,
Year-specific effects is the control for income of...
No, for the income, I have a separate measure. So not really income, but I choose consumption because I think it's a better representation of the income level, basically. So it's a log total consumption of the household. I also have assets index, proportion of household members in different age range, household size, distance to the next hospital. But year effects basically just to control for anything that could be there at a particular year that I was not able to control for explicitly.
Okay, thank you. Other questions? Yes. Well, I guess there are no other questions. I was a little bit worried about your consumption variable. So in your consumption variable, you have both like spendings on funerals and like the other type of consumption, right?
Okay. So I think I did not mention during the presentation. So when I was looking at consumption levels, I used different measures of consumption. Let me go to that. So the first specification, I exclude change in consumption because here I believe that the death coefficient contains both economic and psychological costs. Then I introduced change in total consumption, which includes everything in addition to burial expenses. But then I tried to use the separate measures of different categories of consumption, like food, health, funerals, consumer goods, other goods, to see, because maybe death has economic cost, but only working through specific types of consumption. And I think because of the time constraints, I didn't pay too much attention to that. But we see, in fact, that in some of the situations, it's the funerals consumption. I mean, saying funerals consumption is also kind of an assumption in itself, because if you look at life in Kyrgyzstan data, it says consumption of celebrations, funerals, rituals. So it includes everything. But because there are no really data available for the funerals themselves, I had to go with this. And I mean, it's available, but only for 1 year, and 1 year is not sufficient if we talk about death, which is a rare event.
Yeah. Well, thank you. I was exactly like worried about this. Okay, I think we are running out of time, so we have to finish here. But like if participants have extra questions to Nurgul, I guess we still can discuss some questions in chat, right? And we will for now move along. So we have the second presentation by Ilias Suvanov. He's an instructor at the American University of Central Asia, and he will present his work on migration and elders left behind in Kyrgyzstan.
Thank you, Akylai. Let me just put on the vid mode and full screen. Okay, great. Thank you very much. Thank you for colleagues. Thank you for previous presentation. And I want to also thank co-author Nurgul Ukueva for her original idea how to do this paper, for laying out methodology and working and guiding me. And I also want to thank Akylai for technical support of this paper, for guiding through different aspects of how to write papers and so on. Thank you very much. Let's start. Today's topic will be about the health of elderly parents left behind. Sorry, I see the chat. Oh, okay, sorry, it's not to me. So my presentation will concern the health of elderly parents left behind. And before that, I will talk about it. Let me introduce labor migration. Probably all of you know that Central Asia has the biggest labor migration, and particularly Kyrgyzstan has a labor migration to other countries like Russia and Kazakhstan. Labor migration to Russia constitutes almost 80% of all migrants, and the numbers are already up to 1 million workers outside of Kyrgyzstan that are working in the labor migration. And GDP, I mean, I'm giving the background of my topic, why even we look at the health of elderly parents. GDP of labor migration through remittances increases. It's a common fact. Everybody probably knows that pre-COVID era percentage of GDP that was received through remittances was almost 33%, and ratio of GDP through remittances was for Kyrgyzstan was the highest in the world. Labor migrants they travel abroad through alone or through with their families. Nuclear families or extended families, the situation depends, but we'll talk a little bit later about that. So let's go to the main topic. So what is the main topic? Is the health of elderly parents left behind by their adult children. Usually researchers, what they focus on the health of the small children left behind by their migrant parents. And we've seen a lot of reports, news reports, where children cry over their parents not coming back. They just telling, we don't need any remittances, we don't need any money, just come back, and we need parents. But and this topic was well researched by people, especially in Kyrgyzstan. There was research. However, the vice versa relationship, what the elderly parents feel when their children grow up and move to other countries in search for labor, it's a little or no research was done in that field. I mean, in the case of Kyrgyzstan. And let's look here. Sorry, I see a message in chat. Oh, I see. The vice versa relationship, how the parents feel when the children when the children grow up and travel abroad, has conflicting results. First of all, in both China and Mexico, the migration of children has found to result in lower self-reported health status among elderly parents. And what does it mean, self-reported? It's just basically when surveyors come to parents and ask, how do you feel yourself? Please rate from 0 to 10. And they report. If they feel good, they say, I feel 9, 10. If they feel bad, they say 0 or 1. On contrast, a study from Moldova finds evidence of beneficial impact of migration of adult children on the physical health of elderly family members. So essentially, we find ambiguous results in different directions. And it could be explained by cultural differences in each country and probably peculiarities in their lives. But we are interested what exactly in the case of Kyrgyzstan, what elderly parents in Kyrgyzstan feel when their adult children live there. And this research was partly motivated by qualitative research by Social Research Center of AUCA, done by Nurgul, Emil Nasreddinov, Ruslan Rahimov. What they did a qualitative research. They went through the villages and they was asking and conducting focus groups, interviews with elderly parents, asking, how do you feel? Please tell about your life. And what they found that extreme poverty in two poorest regions of Kyrgyzstan, that elderly parents find themselves in extreme poverty. And from that research, from that qualitative research, we find that elderly parents suffer from when their children leave them. And there could be many circumstances, and you're interested, let's do some empirical analysis. Let's quantify data, work with national representative data that we can say not only about like particular people, but to say what is the general effects of migration. And to talk about migration, first, how it affects the health of elderly parents, we need to talk about channels. How actually migration, through which channels it affects the health of elderly parents. So there are many possible channels, but let us dive deep into main ones. The first one is remittances, as everybody of you probably know. When the migrant child, he, for example, goes to Moscow, he starts working there and he starts sending money back. And the classical idea is that as soon as he starts sending money back to his elderly parents, what they can do, they can buy better food, they can eat good, they can go and buy better health insurance, or in simple words, go and visit a better clinic. But it's not evident that it will be positive effect. Why? Because the question comes, what fraction goes to elderly parents? I mean, when grown-up people, they already have their own families, nuclear families, and probably the husband will send all their money to the wife, and the wife will just distribute the income to the elderly parents or to their children. So the question comes, what fraction goes to elderly parents? The second channel is household labor allocation. As soon as a major breadwinner or man goes out to the labor, what happens that the household suffers from a lack of manpower, and elderly parents now, what they need to do, they need to look after grandchildren, and they themselves in need of taking care. The elderly parents need to be looked after, but now they're looking after their grandchildren, and it's causing them physical pains. And the question also comes, who does household chores? Does the grandparent does, or does the grandchildren does, or maybe the wife that was left behind? It also differs in a long term and short term, because in a long term, households can adapt to the lack of adult children in a household. So grandparents could teach their grandchildren how to do household work, and they just can take a role of adult in their households. The third channel is psychological effects. So when the adult children goes to the work, grandparents always feel some emotional pain. They miss their migrant children. They're afraid for their migrant children, and it's not unfounded. Their fears, because there was a lot of cases when the migrants was hustled, beaten, and their rights was trampled. And also they can suffer from lower social status. I mean, in the same village, the houses that have adult migrant children, they could probably eat cultural, but they could have a higher social status in the eyes of elderly parents. Okay, we talk about channels, through which channels that comes, and let's talk about the model itself. So for clarity of the research, I just give you a brief graph. What we did is that we have an X variable and Y variable, and it's a classical question, how the X affects Y. And what was X? X was a dummy variable where the parent has migrant child. So it's 1 if the parent has migrant child, and 0 if it does not have. And Y is a dummy for poor health. So we have a dummy variable that stands for 1 if parents feeling himself bad, self-reported bad health, and 0 if he feels if it's not bad health. So the question comes, what is effect X on Y? But again, as usual in any empirical analysis, there could be a reverse effect. So we can ask another question, how Y affects X? And just give you brief 2 scenarios. First arrow, how X affects Y, we can lay out scenarios that migrant children, he travels abroad through his exogenous variable, he travels abroad, and it's random variables that he travels abroad, and it affects the health through the channels that I've talked right now, affects health of elderly parents. But I also can give another scenario that why affects sex, and how is it? Is that when the health of elderly parent deteriorates, they need money for surgery. And this need of money for surgery forces the child to migrate for labor. So it's not clear what affects what, X or Y. And to address that, we just do a simple instrumental variables, classical case of in any of this type of problems. For instrumental variables, we take the ratio of migrants in the village. So basically, it is a migration nets. And we say that Z only affects X and Z does not affect Y. And what is the logic that Z affects X through as more migrants in the village, the higher percentage of migrants in the village adult children migrated, it affects whether the children the adult children in that village who has not yet migrated will migrate. How? It's just peer pressure. So he see that his relatives or the same people who lives in the village, they migrated, and he also wants to migrate. So Z affects X, but we can argue, of course, again, it's just you need to argue about that. We can argue that Z does not affect Y. And we will do reduced regression. I will tell you that Z is not correlated with Y. And of course, you need to believe that that Z is not affects Y. It's assumptions that we made. Okay, it's simple instrumental variables, and let me just dive deep quickly in details. We have Y variable is subjective well-being that was asked in a LiK questionnaire. They went to people and asked, please report what is your subjective health. And they say like 0, 1 to from 0 to 10. 0 stands for bad health, 10 stands for good health. And we transformed this subjective well-being data into dummy variable that from 0 to 5, it stands for 1. It means bad health. And from 6 to 10 is 0 health. And why we transformed this this categorical variable into dummy variable? Because it does not make sense to compare to apply mathematical formulas to categorical data like from 0 to 10. And it's much easier, and it's classical methodology to transform it to dummy variable. So X is where the parent has a migrant child. It's 0 or 1. And Z is the ratio of migrants in the village. So we just run the second stage is this formula. Is poor health dummy. We regressed actually on child dummy. Child dummy regressed on poor health dummy. I'm not quite sure how I should say it properly. And we in the first stage we regressed child dummy with instrument, and also in both cases we controlled for some variables that I will tell in a minute. So our regression table. So let me for your view, let me just rotate this. Rotate. So screen. So what you can see here is we have an instrumental variables here, and I apologize, it's hard to see. We just run 3 models, OLS, probit, and instrumental variables, but just take attention to just this column, instrumental variables. We have variables child dam, it's our X variable. We have a gender, we control for gender, age, for marriage, whether the parent was married or not. We control for ethnicity, and ethnicity we have whether the parent Kyrgyz or non-Kyrgyz. We just did that for because they have too much categories. We just combine categories, collapse them. We control for local income per capita. and we control for education and urban, whether the parents lives in urban area or not. So what we found here is that instrumental variables has a significant effect under 10%, under 5%. And sorry, I have table notes on the next slide, so I didn't put it here. It has significant effects, and significance effects is minus 0.196. So basically, it's minus 0.2. So what does it stand minus 0.2? Minus 0.2 stands that as parent, if parent has a migrant child, he will report on his self-reported health outcome, not self-reported health, but he'll report less 20% his poor health. So in other words, to say it more clearly, if the parent has a child in a migration, he will report to have on 20% probability less, he would report his health to be poor. I know it's a little bit convoluted, but we will have conclusion in the end, so it will be much more clear. Let us speed up, and let me again to view slides. Rotating back. Okay, regression table notes is I've talked about it. I will not talk about. And this reduced regression that shows that our instrument is not correlated with Y, so it's okay. We did not violate instrumental variables requirements. It is a summary statistics. I wanted to put in the beginning summary statistics, but I thought it's better to be put it in the end. So the summary statistics is on the columns is just X variable, and it shows that two groups of parents. One group is that has a children and in a labor migration, and one group that do not have children in labor migration. They differ. They differ a lot. So they differ across urban areas, they differ across ethnicity, they differ across marriages. And we also have the poor health. You can say it's a simple regression as summary statistics, but I will not cover it. It's not regression, but roughly you can say what it did. So our results, the main important thing. We found evidence that having child in a migration could potentially reduce likelihood of elderly parents to report bad health quality by 20%. So roughly speaking, under certain circumstances that I will tell just in a minute, that migration is good for elderly parents in general. Again, under many assumptions. And the result stands in ambiguity to quality of research that were conducted by Social Research Center of AUCA on impact of migration on elderly people by Dmitry Kulyablezo and Naseem. So it's not clear. From our paper, if we forget about measurement errors, and what is measurement errors is just self-reported health outcomes plugged by subjectivity bias. So what it means? It means when you go and ask elderly parent, how do you feel? They could report themselves, oh, I feel good. Why? Because they're feeling shy to tell you their problems. They don't want to overburden you with their problems. So it is a subjectivity bias. And how we wanted to address the subjectivity bias to look whether this variable correlates with real physical indicators of health outcome. Like, does a parent have a stroke? Does a parent has a heart attack? Does a parent has diabetes? But we could not find this data through the LiK. We could not. We found, but it is ongoing research, and we will probably add this correlation between subjective well-being and real physical well-being to look whether our model is robust or not robust. And even though taking in consideration this measurement error, probable measurement error, self-reported health outcome, again, this about the self-reported health outcome, we can say that our results show that direction of the impact is at least ambiguous. Further research that finds more robust instruments are needed in order to provide more rigorous answer for the directional impact. And of course, needs to look at the correlation between the subjective well-being and physical health of elderly parents. Just to end the remarks, the best case scenario in all these empirical studies is to do some experiment. I mean, natural experiments, as some of you know, and some papers did already that. They look at green card lottery. So what they did, they surveyed the people who won green card lottery, the parents that they left behind, and the families that did not won green card lottery, and they look at the results. Yeah, thank you very much. My presentation is finished.
Okay, thank you, Ilias. Thank you for your presentation. We have questions. So Muktarbek, maybe you want to ask your question yourself? Or do you want us just to read, Ilias, maybe okay to just read the question and respond in chat?
Yeah, I can read. Thank you, Muktarbek, for the question. And your question is, what is the formula for determining the instrumental variable, which is a migration network, is a ratio of households with the migrants to the total number of households from the community? Oh, yeah, thank you very much. I did not specify what is instrument Z. How we compute it is essentially LiK. He goes and surveys communities, and each community have we call it SOTO. And what instrument is just a ratio of adult migrants in that village. So the LiK could go to the cities. They can measure cities, and again, it's just we take the LiK data and we look at which places they went, and just look at these clusters and look what is the ratio of in this cluster of migrants. So it is as simple as that. Mm-hmm. It's a migration, it's called.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah, thank you. Other questions? Yeah, Nurgul, please.
Thank you very much, Ilias, for the presentation. I just had maybe some comments, maybe some suggestions, and also some questions. So one suggestion that I had was, because you're using qualitative data, which is ordered, so maybe why not use something like ordered logit, so that you don't throw away information, because when you are converting into a dummy, you are kind of a little bit throwing out the information. So maybe trying with ordered logit. And then a question that I had was, do you include individual fixed effects, or do you include some variables that would be kind of arguments in the health production function, some health-related variables?
Regarding health-related variables, it's just we included age and let me go to my regression table. We just included age, and I don't think we included the health-related, like the weight. But it's really great idea to include it to control for differences. And our idea was also like maybe look at objective health indicators, and somehow to look to make the model more robust and look with how it looks under. But yes, we did not include, but it's ongoing research, and we will include. Thank you very much.
Yes, and if of course, it's not possible to include all the health related, and just to minimize that omitted variable problem is maybe to include also individual specific effects to control for things like genetics, etc., etc.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yes,
Thank you, Nurgul, for your comments. Okay, I think we don't have any additional questions, right? From the audience. Okay, yes, we have a question, Ilias, in chat.
Does the likelihood of 20% less reporting bad health have a clinical relevance? Do you mean by clinical relevance, does it's somehow correlated with physical, objective physical health, like, I don't know, blood pressure, or sorry, Elvira, yes, Elnura.
Yes, I do. Yes, I mean that.
Oh, so you mean like, does the, like, this 20% less probability of reporting a bad health outcome correlated with physical indicators? No, it's not correlated. Why? We did not include it because it was some, it is ongoing research, and we will include it. It's just self-reported. So because of that, we're saying that it's not 100% clear that migration beneficial, but at least it's just direction of impact is at least ambiguous compared to qualitative research.
Yeah, I was actually just wondering, I'm not so familiar with this research method, and I have unfortunately missed the first part of your presentation, but I was just wondering, this 20% of likelihood, is it like a big impact in your eyes, in your opinion, or is it a moderate impact, or?
20% reporting less likelihood. I think really you should look. I mean, to look at whether it's big or not, I need another numbers, like what is the impact on Kazakhstan on migration, or I don't know, on Uzbekistan. I don't have these numbers, but I think it's yes. Sorry, I don't know. I think it's okay. It's big percent, 20%.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Well, we have 2 minutes, so we could have one more question if the audience has any questions. Yes, please. Remy? Please unmute yourself to ask a question. Yes, thank you.
Okay, thank you. I struggle to unmute myself. Yeah, I'm referring to this this magnitude, the 20%, because I agree you might compare with some other countries, but what you can do is also to check in just the distribution of the data you have to see whether this 20% actually is a big change in terms of where the household is, or the person is located on the distribution. You know, like a move in terms of standard deviation, etc., can be helpful here.
So yes, to compare with distribution that we have data on subjective health, report health. Yeah, thank you. I will do that. We will do that actually. Yeah, with Nurgul.
Okay. Yeah, and we have an additional comment. So I guess it's more like a suggestion, right? So since your dependent variable is limited from 0 to 5 or to 10, it means that it's better to use like limited dependent variable model. So I guess this is in addition to what Nurgul has suggested. Yeah, I think we unfortunately are out of time, so we need to move on. Thank you everyone for your questions. Thank you, Ilias, for your presentation. I guess like, as you now received a lot of comments and suggestions, you can improve your work and then maybe do something in terms of publishing it. So we need to move on, and we have our third presentation. I'm sorry, Ilias, can you please like stop sharing your screen? Thank you. So we have a third presentation on intimate partner violence in relation to women's socioeconomic factors in Tajikistan by Jonbegim Mukhtor. And yeah, Jonbegim, please. She is from the University of Central Asia in Tajikistan.
Yes, so thank you. Hello, everyone. My name is Jonbegim, and I'm the recent graduate of UCA with a major in global economics. And as part of my senior thesis, I researched the topic intimate partner violence in relation to women's socioeconomic factors in Tajikistan that I'm going to present today. So before starting, let me just quickly define what intimate partner violence stands for. So intimate partner violence refers to the violent acts of an intimate partner that cause physical abuse, psychological assault, and sexual harassment. So why I chose this topic is that this issue has been prevalent across the world, affecting the lives of millions of women and violating their human rights. So Tajikistan has been among the many countries where the issue has become prevalent, notably following its independence in 1991. Although the country inherited equal gender arrangements for men and women during the Soviet Union, but after the collapse, it returned to its traditional and patriarchal values of the country, where men are considered to be more dominant, with women having less voice, less opportunities to pursue education, and also less likely to participate in the labor market. So according to a report by the UN Women, at least 1 in 5 women in the Central Asian country were affected by domestic abuse in 2017. And another report by the ADB states that estimates range from 1/3 to 1/2 of all women. And there was actually a survey conducted in 2012 that also found that 19% of the respondents reported that they had experienced any type of IPV. 13% of whom reported that the incident took place within the last 12 months of the survey. So why is this issue important to study and tackle is that it does not only involve social and health and psychological problems, but and costs, but it also incurs huge economic costs. Not only for those individuals, but for the state as well. And I will briefly touch upon these costs. So the first economic cost that results from this issue is the direct cost in terms of the increased expenditure on the medication and health treatment by the women, the victims themselves, and their family, as a result of which the consumption of the whole family gets negatively affected. And basically, this does not only affect the woman, but the whole household. Moreover, this results in loss of productivity of the women, and thereby negatively affecting the businesses that they work for, that just suffer then from the loss of productivity. Moreover, the state also bears costs in terms of the loss of tax revenue, since many of the women then lose their earning potential, and or it gets declined. And the state as well, it imposes large costs on the state in terms in the health facilities, in terms of the expenditure on the facilities, on the electricity, as well as the labor costs of the healthcare workers, and as well, and lastly, it imposes costs on the social welfare agencies that work with these women and providing consultancy services and etc. Therefore, in order not to attribute all of the issue to the strong patriarchal norms and values of the country and the traditions, but in order to see if there are some other factors behind this, this research aims to answer the following research questions, particularly looking at the socioeconomic factors of the women in Tajikistan to see what is the particular situation of those women that makes them prone to experience it, as well as to see if the husband's background characteristics also make a difference. So these are specifically the socioeconomic and behavioral characteristics. Touching upon the literature, there has been a vast literature found like on IPV from both the health and economic perspective worldwide. But unfortunately, the data for Tajikistan is very limited since there have not been such studies conducted so far. And it is only limited to some qualitative studies or reports that have been conducted like UN reports that are based on the interviews with those women. But there has been one notable exception. So by a study by Chernyak that was conducted in 2018, but the focus of that study is quite different from the focus of my study. So that study included the behavioral factors and the partners controlling behavior. Whereas in this research, I aim to look at the socioeconomic factors and to see how they explain the intimate partner violence caused by those women. So for the research, the data was obtained from the Tajikistan Demographic and Health Survey that was conducted in 2017. And this was the second survey following the first one that was conducted in 2012. So the survey is nationally representative, covering the whole country. And although it originally covered more than 10,000 women, this research used 4,822 currently married women because firstly, not all of those women the total number of women were selected for the domestic violence module, as well as for this research, I particularly look at the currently married women because I'm also looking at the husband's characteristics. So for the analysis, descriptive and logistic regression methods were used to see the effect. And before going into to the variables and looking into the results, let's have a look at some descriptive statistics. So this is on the prevalence of IPV by types in Tajikistan. As you can see, the chart shows that overall, like around 28% of the respondents indicated that they had experienced any type of violence, 14.6% experienced emotional violence, and 22% experienced physical violence. So the reason why sexual violence is not included in the study is that the response rate was extremely low for sexual violence, which could be explained by the fact that it is a very personal topic, and particularly women do not feel comfortable talking about it in the country, as opposed to some other countries where such data is available. So the variables were chosen following the literature review and as well as the availability of data. So here they can be broadly categorized into two main categories. These are the women's socioeconomic factors as well as the husband's characteristics. So you can see that the age, residence, education level, the wealth index, and employment status, number of children of age 5 and under, as well as the difference in education variable were included for the women, and the husband's characteristics such as the husband's education, the alcohol consumption, and husband's employment status were included. So I also included the media exposure variables that that were expressed in terms of the frequency of reading newspaper, listening to radio, watching news, and owning a mobile phone and using the internet. So the model specification, as I mentioned earlier, I used logistic regression. So in terms of the probability of experiencing violence, and it is expressed as a function of the independent variables that I earlier mentioned. So in total, 6 regressions were run, and 3 were the reason initially I intended to run only 3, so 1 for each type of violence and 1 regression for the overall experience of violence. But there was found to be like a correlation issue initially, so I excluded significantly associated with all types of violence, particularly those in the higher age categories, being more likely to experience violence than those in the lowest age category. And this could be explained by the fact that elder generation or older women are more are accepting this, that men need to be dominant, and they also stick to those patriarchal values that existed since long time ago, whereas younger generation are more exposed to globalization, are better aware of their human rights, and are less likely to endure it. Residence was found to be significantly associated with emotional IPV, so particularly those residing in the urban areas being less likely to face violence, emotional violence, than those residing in the rural areas. So this could be explained by the fact that in the rural areas, women are less economically empowered due to having limited opportunities to pursue education and limited work or employment opportunities. That's why they are less economically empowered, which makes them more dependent on the spouse and more likely to endure the violence that they face. So the wealth status of the household, those who came from the richest households were found to be less likely to experience all types of IPV than those who came from the poorest wealth quintiles. And this actually could be looked at both from the women's side and from the spouse. So those that come obviously from the poor households, they are less empowered economically, more dependent on the household, and this increases their likelihood of them accepting the violence and enduring it. But from the husband's perspective, those that come from the poor households, actually, they may be more psychologically down due to the fact that they are not able to provide for their families, and as a result, they might get violent at a slightest provocation. So that could be also explained by that. The women's education was found to be significantly associated with physical IPV and overall IPV, indicating that women who had higher education were less likely to experience violence than those who were not educated at all. And obviously, having education means that they will have more opportunities for employment, and also it will increase their earning potential, and as well as they will be able to provide for their families in the future. But without education, this makes again the woman dependent on the spouse. So the husband's characteristics, so the husband's employment as well as the husband's education were found to be significantly associated with all types of IPV, specifically those whose husbands, those women whose husbands were employed were less likely to experience violence than those whose husbands were not employed at all. And this, as I mentioned, could be explained by the fact that those husbands they spend a lot of their time at work, and they also they get busy, which could explain that, but also their financial situation is better, so that's why this makes the women less likely to experience violence. And for educated husbands, this same goes for educated husbands. So those women whose husbands were having secondary education were less likely to experience violence than those whose husbands were not educated at all. So educated husbands are better aware of the costs and consequences of of the issue and of the actions, violent actions that they will take. So this makes those women less likely to experience violence. Regarding the difference in education level, So those women whose husbands were more educated than themselves were found to be more likely to experience physical violence and overall violence as compared to those who had the same level of education with their husband. And the difference in education, and specifically in the case of the husband being more educated, could mean that those women are again more relatively they are less empowered economically, as well as more dependent on the husband. Since more education could be also explained by having more increased earnings, and then this makes them again prone to experience violence. And regarding the alcohol consumption, women whose husbands were found to use or consume alcohol were found to be more likely to experience all forms of violence than those whose husbands did not consume any alcohol. And alcohol consumption is explained by the results in an aggressive behavior. So this could be a factor that also makes those women experience violence. Regarding the number of children of age 5 and under, women who were having 5 or more children of age 5 and under were more likely to experience all forms of violence than those who did not have any children of that age. And this could be explained by the fact that the more children the woman has, and then the less likely that she will leave her husband, and and she would just endure with the violence, because having more children means that the woman is less able to provide they may be less able to provide for their families and for their children on their own. So that's why more likely to endure it. Moreover, in Tajikistan, this could result from the belief that that people generally hold an opinion that without father, children will suffer without a father, because they will face pressure both from the society, from their peers, and for those reasons they will continue to endure it and accept it. So regarding the media exposure variables, only mobile phone and internet usage were found to be significantly associated with violence. So particularly those who owned a mobile phone and who used internet were less likely to experience all forms of violence than those who did not possess a phone or use the internet. So this could mean that women who are exposed to media, are better aware of their human rights, and as well as anti-violence campaigns are being conducted through these channels and through the media. So that's why they are better aware of their rights and of the issue in general. And this exposure makes them less likely to endure it and then experience the IPV. Going into the top line results following the table I just mentioned. So women residing in the urban areas with higher education, from higher wealth quintiles, who owned a mobile phone, used the internet, and whose husband was educated and employed in the past 12 months of the survey were less likely to experience IPV. Whereas women of older age groups with more children of age 5 and under in the household who listened to radio less than once a week, whose husband drank alcohol and was more educated than his wife, were found to be more likely to experience it. So this brings us to important recommendations that could be made. First of all, special attention needs to be given to rural women, since those were found to be among the vulnerable. And this could be done through conducting awareness programs as well as empowerment programs, not only for the women residing in rural areas, but also women of older age groups who were also found to be more vulnerable to the issue and more likely to experience it. So awareness campaigns which will allow those women to understand their human rights, as well as as well as getting more empowerment will serve as one step towards tackling the issue. Moreover, education needs to be made more accessible, since both women and it was found that both women and men who were educated were it was in favor of the women whose husbands were educated, as well as those who were educated themselves, that they were less likely to experience the violence. Moreover, employment opportunities need to be provided, which would also help empower women financially and making them more able to provide for their families and less reliant on the husband, and thereby less likely to endure the violence that they face. And lastly, the behavior and perception of the spouses needs to be changed, since the alcohol consumption was also found to be significantly associated with the experience of violence. So this could be, their attention could be shifted from that into some other important areas, and particularly this would mean that the investment in education as well as employment opportunities could change that. This was pretty it for today. Thank you very much for your attention. And if you have any questions, you are more than welcome to ask.
Thank you, Jonbegim. I think for an undergraduate thesis work, it's a really well done work. I mean, of course, it has certain methodological flows, but for an undergrad work, I think you've done a great job. Yeah, any questions, comments from the audience? You still can, again, can write in chat or just raise your hand and ask the questions directly. Maybe if it's not a question, but some comment or suggestion. Yes, Nurgul, please go ahead.
Thank you very much, Jonbegim. So I had several questions. Do you happen to know how they actually answer the questions? Does the DHS explain that? Because of course these are very sensitive questions, if the husband is present or not, etc.
Yes, so this is a survey that is conducted. So they have a one-on-one interviews with the women without the presence of the husband and any of the household members. And so the dependent variable is the self-reported experience of violence. And there have been a set of questions in the survey that are then later divided into three main categories. So into the experience of sexual violence, physical violence, or emotional violence. So there are a set of questions for each of those, and that's how they are categorized into the types.
Thank you very much. And then another question was, I know that you control for the employment status of a woman. Is there information about her income? Is it possible to include a variable for specifically the woman's income or not? Because I know there is income of the family, I think, that you include.
Yes, so for the income, unfortunately, there was not data available for the income of the women themselves. So that's why I could not include that one. Yes, but I included the wealth of the household, which was more close to that.
And just the last comment, I apologize. When you present the results, when you present it using odds ratios, one thing you could also do, maybe you could also present a separate table with marginal effects, maybe for the reference woman with, for example, mean characteristics, so that we have a better idea of what is the magnitude of the effects. Thank you.
Yes, Nurgul, thank you. Thank you so much for your contribution to the discussion. Any other questions, comments?
Yeah.
Yes, Ilias.
Can I just ask about mobile phone usage? I was a little bit confused from the table. What this dummy variable stands for? Does it use mobile phone?
Yes, it is a binary variable for owning a mobile phone or not owning a mobile phone.
Okay, so this number stands if they own mobile phone,
yes.
Then violence increases.
No, so if the woman owned a mobile phone, it was found that they were less likely to experience violence than those who did not own a mobile phone at all.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, thank you. I have a question regarding some categories that you had. So for age, you didn't have age just like a number, you had like different age categories. So does that come from the survey, or that is like the way you have categorized them?
Yes, so on the table, I just included per one category for each of my variables, because obviously if I include all of it, then that would just not be placed on, it could not be placed in on one slide because the table is originally huge. But for age, so yes, I did not mention, it included women of reproductive age, and from in this data, it was from a data set, it was from age 17 to 49 years old. So then based on that, I categorized the variables into three main categories. So the first category, or the youngest, being from 17 years old to 27 years old, 28 to 38 years old, and 39 to 49 years old.
I mean, I just didn't really understand why you had to convert into categories if you just had like a standard like age number.
Yes, standard. Yes.
Yeah. Can you just also ask a question? Your Y variable is yes or no? Yes, intimate partner violence.
Yes, it is a binary variable.
Okay, and your X variables are Z variables from the table.
Sorry, the X variables are?
Your X variable.
Yes, X variables were the ones that I showed in the table as well in the category of variables. The Y was, as you mentioned, it is self-reported experience of violence, and that is a yes/no question or a binary variable.
Okay.
Yes, and for Akylai's question, sorry, so yes, so yeah, coming to your question, the women were reported, the ages were recorded like from 17 to 49 years, like many age, so that would, like you cannot include all of those, it would not make sense like to include all of those ages from the age 17 to 49 and having plenty of those numbers, so it was better, and for ease it was more easy, it was easier to categorize those and have like three categories, and also following the literature review and the detailed look into how other papers also use that age variable, then we decided to categorize them.
Sorry, so I think what Akylai means is just why not use the age variable as it is? Because it's a continuous variable without having to categorize it. So you are left with just one variable, and then you can immediately do the interpretation if a woman is 10 years older, etc., etc., I think. Yes.
Yeah, exactly. And the question is, it relates to the number of children. So that 5 was, again, like, does that come from the survey data, or like you have done it yourself?
No, so it comes directly from the data. So for the number of children, there was this variable already available, and it comes directly from there.
Okay, so there is no question in the survey about like the number of children, but like the question is more about, okay, do you have more than 5 or less than 5 children in your family?
Oh, so if that's what you mean, yes. So they had a question on if they have children of age 5 and under, and if yes, how many children are there in? How many children do they have of age 5 and under? So so then I categorized it into categories again. So having no any children of that age, and also having from 1 to 2, 3 to 4, and more than 5.
I mean, I wouldn't maybe categorize it myself, but like, okay, sure. I think that, well, we have time for one more question, if there's any question from the audience. If not, then maybe if Nurgul and Ilias and Jonbegim, if in chat at least, you provide your contact information so that maybe someone could reach you with their questions later on, and then we will finish the session, okay? So thank you everyone for participating in our session on gender and intra-household relations. I think that the presentations were very interesting, and they were very, very different on different issues. And I would like to thank our speakers Nurgul, Ilias, and Jonbegim for their interesting presentations and for such nice discussion that we had. So we had contact information for Ilias, for Nurgul, and I guess Jonbegim will also enter her information now. So maybe if you want, you can contact them a little bit later after this session. And because we are already out of time, we need to finish our session now. So thank you. I want to thank everyone for coming. Yeah.